Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Oh. Sorry about that. This meeting of the Sioux Falls Charter Revision Commission will come to order. I would note for the record that we have a quorum of members present for the meeting. Item 2 of the agenda, approval of minutes from the meeting of June 19. The chair would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Hayek, seconded by Commissioner Politis, that we approve the minutes of the June 19 meeting of the Charter Revision Commission. All those in favor will vote aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Those minutes are so approved. Item 3 on the agenda this afternoon will be consideration of old business. Before we get to that, if the Commission will indulge me for just a moment, the question has been raised whether or not the Charter Revision Commission will limit the time for each speaker during the public input portion of each commission hearing. It would be my preference not to limit the time for each public input speaker, with the understanding that the chair reserves the right, if the speaker gets far off topic or is abusing the privilege of having more than 5 minutes, that the chair would reserve the right to cut off that person's time at that point. If that, standing rule basically sounds satisfactory to the commission, then, or if you have any thoughts on it, just let me know. Okay. Item A under old business, consideration of a possible amendment to Charter Article 9, in particular, Section 9.05, sub F, salary of mayor and council members. This item was discussed at length during the previous session of the Charter Revision Commission, particularly in 2017 and somewhat in 2018. The Commission heard some presentations from a couple of members of city staff, particularly on what the comparable salaries are for council members and mayors in cities of similar size to Sioux Falls. At the last meeting, when this topic was on the agenda, several members of the Commission requested that this be moved to consideration at this meeting to allow them time to review the previous presentations that have been made. We've also heard from current and former members of the Sioux Falls City Council who offered their perspective on whether or not an amendment was appropriate to Section 9.05 sub F. At this time, the item is up for consideration for a potential amendment to that subsection, and the chair would entertain comments or any motions from the other commissioners. At the moment, seeing none, is there any member of the public or present in the room who would like the opportunity to address item A under old business, a potential amendment to Section 9.05 sub F of the Sioux Falls Charter? We will need to act on this item in order to move it forward, either to recommend some definitive change, to recommend that we take no action, or to defer action to a future meeting. So the chair would entertain a motion. Commissioner Zylstra.
Mr. Chairman, before I would make a motion, I really was hoping there might be some public input before I made my comments. I did go back and review the videos and the documentation from all previous discussions of this group. I do think that this is something that doesn't seem to be going away, so we probably need to either move forward or bring it to conclusion either today or at the next meeting or when we finalize things for the year. Here is what struck me going back that I hadn't heard addressed very much, except that at the meeting of December 6th of 17, then Commissioner Aguilar talked about how the city had grown. And that struck me as being almost more pertinent to the mayor's salary than to the councilor's salary. As I understood from some of the previous presentations by some of the originators of the current charter, they viewed this as a full-time position. So when they set the salary in the charter, which is a little, from my point of view, unusual to have it as a permanent part of the charter rather than just a transition part of the charter, they apparently, I would presume, took into account what it meant to be administrator of the city of Sioux Falls. So I asked the staff, and thank you for your work, to go back, and not to 1995, but to 1992 as a baseline when the concept was gelling. And since 1992, the population has increased 75%. The number of employees that the mayor manages have increased 48%. And the budget, even adjusted for inflation, if I did my numbers right, has increased about 111%. So the mayor is administering a much larger organization than was envisioned or in the reality when the charter was being created and the salary was being set. So I was wondering if really the discussion, if we are going to make a change, needs to be more broadly changed. And if the mayor's salary was increased, then in fact, everybody else, including the councilors, would come up as well. There were a number of comments talked in the past which talked about the fact that the charter set the council salary at 15%. It didn't. It set it at $7,500, which was 10%. And in the year, I think it was 2000, it was increased to 50% as an amendment. So the council has already been increased 50% along the way. The mayor has never been adjusted. So it seems to me that if we are going to step forward, perhaps we need to look more broadly. That raises my greater question, however, is whether this commission is well suited to be a compensation committee. And there are other options for setting elected officials' salaries. I am not sure about the laws in the state of South Dakota. I would ask the city attorney if, in fact, there could be an independent compensation commission that makes a recommendation that then would be adopted every year by the city council itself. But I think it's a broader, if we're going to do something, we have to look at broader issues. I'm not prepared today to simply say, oh, increase the councilors' salaries without looking at the broader questions of, is this a total compensation issue because the city has grown and it's quite a bit larger perhaps than was ever dreamt of in 1992 when it was first being created, and whether in fact, if we are going to talk about a change, whether we ought to move in the direction of a compensation commission, which would take it out of the hands of a group which is really designed for charter revision, not for determining what the mayor and the councilors should get paid. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hayek?
Thank you. I was looking for the charts because I know I reviewed them. I wasn't on the commission when we had them, and I had to have reviewed them online. And as I looked at the compensation comparisons for Sioux Falls and comparable communities such as, well, we've got Council Bluffs and Omaha, Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska. You know, Sioux Falls is over that and is well cared for. And I know, serving as an at-large counselor with the very first implementation of the charter, one of the issues that we always have to keep in mind is that this is public service. And at no point in time does it become a competitive, highly competitive job. It should, I want to say that it needs to be competitive, not to the point where people are seeking the position because of the compensation. It's kind of a twofold item. And as I've reviewed the information that we were presented and online, I don't have the hard copy here, but thank you. Sioux Falls is well within the boundary of what would be deemed to be a reasonable. And so I would make a motion that we take no action on this item.
Commissioner Hayek has moved that,
Mrs.
excuse me,
Mrs. Hayek.
Mrs. Hayek has moved that the Charter Revision Commission take no action on a potential amendment to Section 9.05 of the Sioux Falls Charter. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, seconded by Ms. Politis. Any discussion on that motion?
May I?
Yes.
A little bit further in terms of, we look at the mayor and the council then becomes part of that. And one of the issues with the councilors, as I reviewed the information, you know, it's supposed to be 15 hours a week, and 15 hours a week maybe is more than some people put in and a lot less than others. But there again, we are talking about public service in the community, and as people choose that, we want to make sure they understand that if the council is doing the truly council job, which is legislative, that the compensation should be very much in line with what they're doing.
Further discussion?
If I could, I think that is really the, to me, has been the crux of the issue, is I have heard from some that it is a full-time job, that they're spending over 40 hours a week on their city council work, out meeting with people, and everything else. But I guess, to my recollection, that when the charter came up, that it would be similar to the school board on that. And I will say that as a past school board member, I know there were some that would spend a lot of time visiting schools, seeing what is there and everything else, out meeting with people. I guess I didn't have that luxury. Would try to do what I needed to do as a school board member, would be there, always willing to listen to people. But I think that is really the item that if we look at this, do we change it? And to me, it's always when you throw out a number, how it is heard makes a significant difference. To some people, if you throw out a number of, I'll throw a number of 80,000, that if we were to say that we'll pay our city council members 80,000, there would be, but we want it as a full-time job, you can have no other employment. There would be those who would say, this is a great job, and I would be happy to do it. And there would be others who would say, no, I can't do this as a full-time job. I'm willing to do public service, but not to the exclusion of anything else. And I think that's always the difficulty. I think the one exception to that is when we look at our mayor, that that has to be a full-time position as to what is there. And I would assume that on our motion is that we're not taking any action at this time. That does not mean it can't be revisited should something else come up on that, but at this time that we'd take no action. Is that correct?
Yes.
I would defer to Ms. Hayek on that one, but I believe that's correct.
Yes, that is what I intended.
Further discussion on the motion? Mr. Soustra?
Mr. Chairman, my previous comments were not intended to open a new discussion, but to indicate that basically I support this motion. Unless we are going to look at a broader issue of how compensation is determined and or including the mayor, who is the full-time person and whether the original structure still suits for the mayor's office, then I certainly would endorse this motion.
Further discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chair, and as I heard you initially asking for either some action taken on it, a deferment, or no action, my motion is for no action.
Thank you.
Clarification.
Appreciate the clarification. Seeing no further comments from my fellow commissioners, I'll just offer a few on this. I do appreciate the comments from Mr. Zylstra and Ms. Hayek. I think I share their concerns. The council, city council, does have the authority to recommend an amendment to section 9.05 of the charter, including sub F. So if the council so desired, they could launch much more thorough policy-based analysis of whether or not an increase to the compensation structure or even benefits for city council members would be appropriate. Compensation for government officials is always a politically charged issue. I don't think it's appropriate for this body, the Charter Revision Commission, to get involved in that decision at this time, particularly where we don't have a specific motion for an amendment to the language of the charter before us. The commission has insufficient time to consider and investigate. We're not a policy-setting body. We heard a request from some members, current and former, of the City Council that perhaps it's time for the council members to receive benefits from the city, up to and including health insurance. I think that those can also be set by the council, either by ordinance or some other form of policy-making decision. It's my understanding from talking to people who are involved, one of whom will speak this afternoon in the framing of the charter, that the initial proposal for the mayor's salary in section 9.05 was for about $150,000 salary per year back in 1993-4. That was the group initially adopted the charter, made the decision that it would be at $75,000, and that has stood for the last almost 25 years since the charter was first adopted. I think the original framers, the adopters of the charter, saw exactly what Ms. Hayek talked about. This is a public service role, and there's going to be some aspect of that in the way the compensation is set and how much these public officials receive. So without a specific proposed amendment today, I would support the motion that we take no action to amend section 9.05 of the charter. Any further discussion? Mr. Timian? Okay. Seeing none, the question before us is motion to take no action on section 9.05. All those in favor will vote aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Item B under old business, the question of whether or not we should allow telephonic participation in meetings by Charter Revision Commission members. I think at this point we're just looking for the commission to make a motion if you would like to have the ability for members of this commission to participate, including vote, in commission meetings by phone. I'll open the floor to discussion on that point.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Hayek?
what is the policy like for the Ethics Committee and other ad hoc committees for the city? Do they have telephonic?
Yes, they are allowed to. And we did check, there are a couple statutes on that regarding public meetings, SDCL 1-25-1.5 and 1.6, which both allow telephonic appearances at meetings, at attendance at meetings. There is some criteria in the event that if commission members appear telephonically, that there would be some, in effect, relaxing of the rules for public input to that effect. Not really an issue in front of us today, but it is allowed per state law.
Mr. Timian?
If I could, I would look at that, and there may be a time where we have a fairly perfunctory meeting, and that may be very appropriate, but I think each of us could make the decision that if telephonic is the best way for us to participate, But I guess I would like to have that as an option. So I would move that we do allow for telephonic participation.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Timian, seconded by Mr. Zylstra, that we allow telephonic participation by commissioners for the Charter Revision Commission. Any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chair,
Aye.
kind of responding a little bit to Mr. Timian, that I think it is important also that there are some guidelines in regard to the participation of the members. And I'm not saying this particular adage, but to say something to the effect that a council member shall, or a commission member shall attend at least 3/4 or, 9/10 of the meetings in person. I don't know if we can put those kind of requirements on it, but I think it is important to note that we don't want to have a meeting where every member is here telephonically. So that's just something to keep in mind. Thank you.
I would ask the city attorney's office if there's any city policies of any kind related to how often members of city boards and commissions have to attend meetings in order to maintain their membership.
There might be, we'd have to check on that.
And that's fine. I think for today, it makes sense to vote on the motion to allow telephonic appearance. And then I do agree that it's worth considering a standing rule related to how many meetings you must attend in person. If we hear seagulls and ocean surf in the background. So, further discussion on the pending motion. Seeing none, the question before us is the standing rule to allow commission members to participate in meetings telephonically. All those in favor will vote aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Second item, or third item under old business, item C, discussion of future meeting dates. This raises 3 issues. The first is the meeting on August 28th. The chair asks the indulgence of his fellow commissioners. I realized only after the fact that I did not have a meeting that afternoon on my calendar that I should already have, and so I probably would not be able to do a meeting on August 28th. I'm hoping that that you all would be willing to move the date of the August 28th meeting to another date in August.
Mr. Chair,
Ms.
could
Hayek.
you give us an alternate recommendation?
August 29?
That works. That does not work for me.
Okay. August 21 or 22?
I'm out of the country. I'll return the 25th.
It's a council meeting on the evening of the 27th, correct? Monday, the 26th of August?
That works.
Seeing all nodding heads? All right. Seeing no objection, we will move the August 28 meeting to August 26, Monday. Thanks very much, everyone, for your indulgence. Next, November 6, our meeting of that date, there is a Planning Commission meeting that evening beginning at 5:30. Members and public will begin to arrive no later than 5:15. So we either need to move that meeting date or have it in our mind that we need to be wrapped up by no later than 5:15 so that we can clear out for that meeting. Which brings me, as part of that, to the third item. It appears that we're going to have a more active public input and proposal of recommended amendments to the charter this year, and more discussion by this commission of the various items that will be proposed. So I've been asked to propose that we either plan to because we've typically been holding our meetings to about an hour. But so that we don't run over after 5 p.m. and require city staff to stay on past 5, to consider bumping the meeting times up to 3:30 in the afternoon instead of 4 for all the meetings. So the option would be that on that November 6th meeting, as well as all the others that we've got currently on the agenda, that the meeting time would just move up to 3:30 so that we could hopefully be done within an hour and a half. And I don't think we've had any meetings that have gone past that amount of time. Is there any objection to that on the commission?
So that would start, August 26th would be a 3:30 meeting instead of a 4?
Correct.
And we'd go 3:30 start for all of our other meetings?
Correct.
Fine.
Any issues from City Attorney's Office? Okay. All right, seeing no objection, we'll set all of our meeting times for the Charter Revision Commission for the balance of 2019 to begin at 3:30 p.m. with the dates at the bottom of the agenda for today, with the addition of a meeting for August 26, 2019, again at 3:30 p.m. Item D, list of formal recommendations for revision to the Sioux Falls Charter. You'll find in the agenda packet, right after the minutes from the last meeting, a list of formal recommendations for revision to the Sioux Falls Charter 2019. In working with the City Attorney's Office, it was my thought that we needed to have a central repository where any and all recommendations from the public or from this body for amendments to the Sioux Falls Charter could be kept on a list so that we don't let anything fall through the cracks and so that we give full and fair consideration to all of the items. That is the purpose of this list. I know we'll have some more proposals to add to that today. We will have the date proposed, the name of the person who recommended it, and the type of recommendation. And then if it is in the person's proposal, we will have the charter article and section they are proposing to amend. We received 4 at our last meeting. However, there was no specific charter or article section identified. It would be my preference, and I think it works within our existing procedures, that we will not take action on any items on this list unless a member of this commission moves at a meeting that at the next meeting that one or more of these items will be taken up for action. That way the public has full notice and opportunity to be present and participate in the deliberation of that item. Any discussion on this list?
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Hayek?
I also feel that possibly as we are entertaining information and suggestions from the public, it would be very important for them to cite the specific charter article that they would like to have us alter, because it gives staff kind of, okay, a shot in the dark, where are they actually referring to? And if they're coming and they're really sincere and ardent about their proposal, they will have looked at the charter, they will know what particular article it is that they want to amend. So I would suggest that we have those people that are bringing to us suggestions, that they also pinpoint specifically what change article they would like.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I think I appreciate that. I would not want to cramp the style of someone who has a concern but doesn't have perhaps the experience or history of writing revisions. But I certainly, if they could point to the particular problem, that will be helpful. But I think we or the staff could always, if there's some support for looking at it, draft a particular remedy. I just don't want to put on the part of the public the sense that unless you have a legal remedy, you can't speak. And I don't think that was what Ms. Hayek had in mind, and I just want to make that clear. It's a great idea. Be as specific as possible, point to where in the charter you see the problem, rather than just saying, the mayor has too much power, the council's overstepped their bounds. Now, some of us might feel some things like that, but where, how? And, but I think we and our staff need to also be willing to do some of the wording and the crafting of the proposed remedies that we'll consider.
Thank you. Ms. Hayek?
Well, I would state that from a legislative standpoint, these individuals, as they come like to the legislature or any other governmental body, they need to be familiar with what they want. Our charter is available all over, and for the person to look at it and recommend a change, they need to have known that it needed to be changed. So I would counter that they probably know a little bit more about the charter than you may think. So it's again, a two-way street. When people say, oh, I want all these changes done in government, where? What specifically do you want? Where? Give us at least, I just said the article, and then we'll find it. So I really do think it is incumbent upon those individuals that are asking for change to know what it is that is in the charter, what is not working, or what can be tweaked, and then we can, go from there. I certainly would help them with it. I don't want to turn anybody away, but I do think it's very important that they also understand what it is they're asking to change.
Mr. Chairman, without being too extensive on this, I'm looking at a proposal that's going to be submitted today that I think is wonderful in its presentation. It has what is going to be struck, what is going to be added in their opinion. That's terrific. The closer you can get to that, the better. We could even give that as a model to people. I just don't want people to feel that unless I can come with three-color strike-throughs and additions that I can't speak.
Further discussion? Just offer a few remarks. I think the presenter at the last meeting who proposed the 4 items which are currently on our list requested that the commission and city staff formulate the language, and that's fair. I would just point out, keep in mind that what we put together, if anything, may not be what a specific member of the public actually envisioned. We may believe that they may come to us and say, for example, plurality voting for city council elections should be instituted, and this commission or city staff or whatnot may put together something, an amendment to the charter that would be completely different from what they envisioned. We will have a full docket this year and have limited time to consider changes to the charter, and naturally we'll have to prioritize our work. So I would echo Ms. Hayek's remarks that, I think it's just going to make sense that if you are able to tell us at least the specific article or section that you're proposing to amend, that would make our job much easier and help with our discussion and consideration of these issues. Further discussion on that item? If not, we'll move on from item D under old business to item E, historical information of the city's adoption of the Home Rule Charter. And Commissioner Pauline Politis will be our presenter here. I won't make you go to the docket up there.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I thought it would be helpful to go over the background on what went into the making of the charter and how it was done. From the beginning, this was a community effort. In January of '93, the League of Women Voters held a press conference saying that they supported home rule for Sioux Falls. But they also challenged the community to help them do an intent study on alternate forms of government for Sioux Falls. Public meetings were held with different groups in town, and people came forward and volunteered. We explained the home rule and the 3 forms of government available in Sioux Falls. And that was the commission form, city manager, and mayor aldermanic. And it was very evident fast. There was strong dislike for the commission form. That was with the mayor and 4 commissioners, all full-time. No one person was in charge. A city subcommittee was set up to study the city manager and the mayor council forms, and after intense research and interviews, they recommended the mayor council form. A diverse coalition, Citizens for Modern City Government, was formed with people from all over Sioux Falls and a variety of backgrounds. The purpose was to carry on the process to the election. Their positions going forward were city government elected positions should be regarded as public service. The form of government should have one person in charge to provide leadership and elected part-time officials to make policy only. Use home rule as the vehicle for changing the form of government, and use the model charter as a starting point. The mayor-council form is best for Sioux Falls. At that point, public meetings were held in the high school auditoriums and a number of the libraries with very good attendance, and the concept of home rule was explained, the positions of the coalition, and then people were asked to go into small groups to talk about should councilors be elected at large or by district? What should be the pay of the mayor? What should be the pay of the councilors? And what is the role of the mayor and the councilors? And we got excellent information from these groups. And there was so much enthusiasm to run for part-time councilor, and I hope that some of those candidates were in the audience of those meetings we had. Based on these meetings and further coalition work, the charter then began to take real shape. The coalition remained active throughout the campaign and the successful election.
Thank you, Ms. Politis. Any questions, discussion on that item? Mr. Zylstra?
Mr. Chairman, I mentioned to Commissioner Timian that he has been on this committee commission longer than I've lived in Sioux Falls. So please forgive some of my lack of background. I have two questions, and maybe Pauline, you can answer this, or later on, if Mr. Kirby speaks, we could ask him. I have kind of two questions out of it. One is, if Sioux Falls in 1993, 95 were the size it is today, do you think that would have affected what form of government you proposed? Would you possibly have tilted to the city manager form?
Just my personal opinion, it would be the same. Mayor, council, full-time mayor, part-time councilors.
Thank you. My other question is maybe more technical, and perhaps the city attorney can answer it. If someone wanted to do something similar today, or how did they do it then? I looked both at the state code for home rule, and I looked at the city amendment. I don't see what the vehicle is for coming up with a whole new charter. Because, perhaps we could make 20 different amendments that would change this to, say, a city manager form or something like that. But put them all before the voters, and they might pick some, and they might pick reject others, and then we'd have a very confused situation. To use a different term, how would anybody blow it up and start over? So that you're looking at this charter versus a whole new conceptual charter.
Well, at the risk of sounding like I'm avoiding the question, that's a pretty broad question that would require a lot of work in explaining, and frankly, probably some research to that effect. And so, frankly, the fact that that's not a question at issue That's a difficult one to produce an answer, let alone B, explain it in a situation like this.
Well, I ask it because as I've tried to conceptualize what the role of this commission is, it's not to come up with a whole new system. It's to try to make the current system work better and see what problems there may be that could be adjusted. But sometimes people, history moves on. How did it happen 25 years ago? I'm just wondering what the vehicle would be, and that if there are anybody who appears before this body and says, what you really need is to require a city manager form of government, what would we tell them to do? We could send them away, but what would the alternative be?
On the table is Mr. Zalstra's motion to repeal the entirety of the Sioux Falls Charter? No.
And to that, I would add, I mean, on its face, there is not a lot within the existing charter. There isn't a lot of information in that regard. I would tell you on its face, it's called the Charter Revision Committee, and so you're going to, by your very scope, be limited to revising what's in charter at the present time. So at some point, in the event that you would make a motion akin to something like that, is where we'd step, it would be my duty to come in and say, that's outside the scope of the capacity of this commission.
But to clarify, I don't want to do that.
No, I understand.
But I think there may be things we will hear this year and in coming years that really kind of would require demolishing the current charter and building a new one. So that was done 25 years ago.
Well, what I can tell, I wasn't around at that point, so I can't answer that one. And B, what I would tell you is if that would become something where it's an agenda item, and of course we have the process and procedures for this, at some point I would come in with an opinion to say that's outside the scope. And so, there's sort of maybe when you see it component to that if somebody's attempting to do that. But at this point, there hasn't been anything where that's necessitated that kind of research or opinion. So as long as we stay in revision territory, then I'm content. As far as the greater question as to how they did it then, there are other people that are going to be a better resource for that. Again, not being on today's agenda necessarily, as opposed to, the particular items that have been noticed to the public for discussion.
Ms. Hayek?
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if I will, and Mr. Corser too, I believe Section 603 does address that by powers of initiative and referendum are actually reserved to the electors of the city. And if any of the electors would like to embrace state law and come forward and get the necessary requirement in terms of signatures and proposals, and then bring it to us and we place it on the ballot, it's right there within the charter. And, being elected under that first, it was what they wanted. They were saying, like, we had 5 mayors, essentially. We had 5 commissioners with equal power. And one was, doing one thing and with whatever and the other, and so we needed to have some consolidation. And it's worked extremely well up to this point. I'm always looking at, if it ain't broke, I'm not sure we need to fix anything. It seems to be working extremely well.
Further discussion? The chair would also draw attention to Article 8 of the Charter, which governs the process of amendment. We discussed this at the last meeting, but Section 8.01 lays out 3 methods by which the Charter could be amended, presumably including significant amendments. I don't know that there's a provision of that goes specifically to a new charter drafting commission or something similar to what we had in 1995. But I think that there's a process out there by which there could be significant amendments, not necessarily from the Charter Revision Commission, but perhaps from an initiative of voters to make those amendments. Moving on to new business. At our last meeting, we adopted a procedure for considering amendments to the Charter, whereby we will take in reverse order each article of the Charter, with 3 articles being considered at each meeting. On the calendar today for consideration are potential amendments to Articles 9, 8, and 7, beginning with item A, potential amendments to Charter Article 9. Unless there is an objection from the commission, my proposal would be not to read through each section of Article 9, 8, and 7 in detail, trusting that we have all had a chance to read through those sections in advance of this meeting to consider or propose possible amendments to those sections. Are there any proposals for amendment to Section 9.01 of the Charter, Officers and Employees, from the members of the Commission? Ms. Hayek?
Mr. Chair, I was looking at Section C under 901, an employee holding a city position at the time this charter takes full effect. And essentially, that time has passed, it's gone. I'm wondering if that is even necessary to be in here, or do we leave it for historical purposes?
Thank you, Ms. Hayek. When we addressed these and similar questions in the past session of this commission, it was the decision in working with the city attorney's office that we certainly could put on the ballot proposed amendments to the charter to remove obsolete language that's no longer necessary. However, given the fact that the language has sunsetted at this point and is no longer of really any effect, the decision was made that we wouldn't, unless as part of some existing election, we wouldn't put those questions on the ballot just because, just for cleanup purposes. Any other items on Section 9.01 of the Charter? Seeing none, Section 9.02, Departments, Offices, and Agencies. Are there any proposed amendments from the Commission to Section 9.02? Seeing none, Section 9.03, Pending Matters. Any recommended amendments to that section? Seeing none, Section 9.04, State and Municipal Laws. Any recommended amendments to Section 9.04? Section 9.06, Separability. Any recommended amendments from the Commission to that section? Seeing none. Item B. Well, let me ask this question to the Commission. Would it be the preference of the Commission to open the floor now to potential recommendations from the public for amendments to Article 9 to the Charter, or wait until the public input section of the meeting? Okay. In that case, the chair will reserve for the public input section of the meeting any input from the public on recommendations for amendments to Articles 9, 8, and 7 of the Charter. Moving on, Article 8 of the Charter, dealing with charter amendments. Are there any recommendations from this commission by way of amendments to Article 8 of the Charter?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Zylstra.
Or you probably wanted to call them one by one.
Nope. Actually, I think.
Okay, I will make a recommendation depending on an answer to a question of the city attorney. And that is 8.01D, the last line, which sets the number of signatures for a petition at 5% of the total number of registered voters at the last regular city election. Then I went to the state constitution, section 9.9.2, which specifies not less than 10% of, under home rule, about charters may be adopted or amended if elected, if approved, not less than 10% of those voting in the last preceding gubernatorial election in the affected jurisdiction may by petition initiate the question of whether to adopt or amend. And then I looked at the SDCL 12.5, and it said, neither charter nor ordinances adopted thereunder may set standards and requirements which are lower or less stringent than those imposed by state law. Now, it strikes me our 5% is less stringent than the 10% specified in the state constitution. And if I am not an attorney, I'm not a son of an attorney, I'm a father of 2 attorneys. That doesn't qualify me at all for making a legal judgment. I'm wondering, is this at odds with the state constitution and law governing home rule? If so, I have an amendment. But otherwise, if not, I'm content the way it is.
Excellent question. One of the things that at first blush, having, again, not researched it, and as an attorney, you don't want to speak out of school when it comes to particularly, complex questions of the law. When you look at the state threshold constitutionally, first of all, one of the things I guess that leaps to mind is I trust my predecessors would not have allowed for a charter provision, not to mention our founding drafters, to put something into charter that was inconsistent with state law. So I think on its face, or as a threshold issue, I trust it's constitutional. That being said, I haven't researched it. Based on what the information you provided here, you're discussing, state level elections versus a municipal election. I'd want to research that, but at this point, I have no basis to state, and I would caution against proposing an amendment on that basis without having had the chance to vet that through our office or otherwise.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, could we ask that before the next meeting that the attorney's office just review that? To me, it was the 10%, 5%, almost more of a stringent or less stringent.
But I think the 10% was 10% of voters, and ours is 5% of registered. And if we did 10%, because there are times, I think that the voter turnout, that 10% of registered would be more than 5% of, or 5% of registered would be more than 10% of voting on that. So I don't know how that would go with using different metrics. I thought I'd heard of those who voted versus those who are registered.
Well, and to the point, I think that, and particularly as an attorney, and you talk about the legal analysis component of this, there may be any number of reasons to distinguish the two. And as I sit here, I'm not prepared to explore all of those or discuss them. We're happy to take a look if there's a concern about the constitutionality of that charter provision, and we can certainly do that and take that up at a later meeting.
Mr. Salster, I'll ask this question. So assuming the analysis comes back from the city attorney's office that the 5% of registered voters threshold is valid, there's no problem with our state constitution or state law, would you be proposing an amendment to section 8.01D of the charter to raise the requirement to 10% regardless?
No. My only concern was whether, in fact, we are in congruence with the state home rule law.
As part of that, Mr. Koistra, if you could also explore how many times in the last 25 years under section 8.01D the citizens in Sioux Falls have successfully petitioned and put a charter amendment on the ballot. I think that would be helpful for our consideration of some items, and this one in particular. All right, so further potential amendments to any section under Article 8 of the Charter from the Commission. Mr. Zylstra.
Sorry, this is a picky one, but with my background in communication, it struck me. The 8.02 notice in and published in one or more newspapers of general circulation in the city. Is that the best way to publicize things today? Does it work fine? If it works fine, then nobody ever complains because the the digital and electronic media pick it up and give it good publicity, fine. But it almost seems to me that there are better ways, and my proposed amendment, if it would go, if there's any problem, would be to change this to say published in one or more digital, electronic, or print media outlets of general currency in the city. But if this is just working just fine, if it ain't broke, I really don't want to try to fix it.
Mr.
But it
Zylstra,
seems to me it's dated.
in my professional life, I actually have to work quite a bit with the state statutes that deal with publication of legal notices in newspapers. And I'll certainly defer to the city attorney's office, but these requirements were more than likely set to keep our city charter in compliance with existing state law on publication of notices, to keep the public informed of these kinds of issues. So I think that's where these are coming from, and to change it may pose problems with conflicts there.
And I would add to that, this is a broader issue that the state, I think, is wrestling with. But the current state of state law is that you still rely on newspapers for that. And, upon, modification of state law, I would advise that we continue to remain consistent with the laws as written.
Any other proposed amendments from the commission to Article 8? Seeing none, moving on to the next item under new business, potential amendments to Article 7 of the Charter, dealing with general provisions, conflict of interest, prohibitions, 7.01 and 7.02. Any recommended amendments or points of discussion from this commission under Article 7? Seeing none, we will move on to item D under new business and open the floor to Joe Kirby for a presentation. Welcome, Mr. Kirby.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today about the charter. I think you have my materials. Basically, those of us who wrote the original charter are very happy with how city government has worked in the last 25 years. Did we get everything perfect? Probably not. And so at this point, we have some minor changes we would like to recommend for your consideration. There are 4 basic changes. One is to return to the plurality voting for city council seats, which was originally contemplated, discussed extensively. Our concern when we remained silent on this in the charter was that we assumed turnout for a runoff election for city council seat would often be very nominal. And so we didn't want to run expensive elections, runoff elections for city council seats. So we left out any requirement and assumed that plurality voting would be the order of the day. But that subsequently has been changed a couple times by city councils. And I think now they kind of wish they'd left it alone, because I think they first moved it from plurality to 34%, maybe 10 years ago or so, and then subsequently from 34% up to 50%. And now we are facing runoff elections almost every time if there's more than 2 candidates. So we recommend plurality voting. Number 2, we'd like to reduce the legislative role of the mayor by eliminating his tie-break vote. And the thinking there is we aspired to have 2 separate, strong parts of the government. The executive, the CEO, running city government for us on an administrative level, but also a strong policy-setting city council. And unfortunately, after 25 years, I can't think of too many times that that's worked out. The city council has not fulfilled the role that we originally envisioned, and I got to blame us, not the city council members. We did something wrong apparently, and maybe it's this fix will help if we let the city council appoint or elect its own leadership and run itself as an independent body. We hope that maybe it can be as strong as we originally envisioned. The third, and we learned this lesson with a couple recent city projects, we think a supermajority of 6 should be required on bonding votes. We think that the city center building and also the Village on the River building went through just barely, forced through without a building of consensus, and we'd like to see more consensus building when big projects like that are considered. And the last item is we consolidated the qualification section for running for public office, whether you're running for mayor or for city council, and added a 6 months residency requirement for a district representative, that the representative should live in the district for 6 months before running as a representative. So those are the 4 recommendations. I, on 2 pages, have attached the specific sections that would be amended. I could go through those if you want, but I think you probably have those in front of you and don't need me to do so.
Mr. Kirby, I would echo the comments earlier by Mr. Zylstra. I truly appreciate the very organized, well-presented and clear proposals that you have brought forward. It'll be extremely helpful to us as we put these items on the list of recommendations made. I would open it up to my fellow commissioners for questions of Mr. Kirby. Ms. Hayek.
Thank you. Mr. Kirby, thank you so much. I just want a clarification. You said plurality voting for council members, but not mayor, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. And then for the bonding issues where you want a supermajority, is there a price point at that, at a certain level?
I assume, maybe incorrectly, that bonding would always be a significant sum if there's a bonding question.
And I don't know. You know, I guess they bond for, you know, yeah, $2.5 million and $25 million. So I don't know if there's I don't know.
I'm not aware.
Should, but I don't.
We didn't discuss an amount, okay, but I mean, obviously
so
we intend, when there's a significant question like when those 2 buildings are referred to, we think that should be a supermajority.
I was just curious. Thank you.
Further questions of Mr. Kirby? Mr. Zylstra.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for your work. And if you would care to answer my other question, what was the vehicle legally you used?
Be happy to. We simply drafted a charter, our group did, and after perfecting it with a lot of public input, we drafted a petition and passed the petition and got enough signatures to put it to a public vote.
So you did it under initiative, not under amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, again, I will say thank you for your work 25 years ago, and thank you for your visit today and those 4 steps. Just want to make sure I understand this, that with the 8 counselors, you'd need a 5-3 vote to pass anything, but a 6-2 to do bonding.
Correct.
At least for minimums.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And we by the way, I should mention, I'm speaking on behalf of myself and Dale Froelich, the other gentleman I worked closely with when we drafted the charter, and I worked also closely with Mrs. Politis and Bill Peterson, who the 4 of us were really the group, the 4 that drove the bus on this thing. So I should mention that. But there's been some discussion of whether we change the number of council seats. 8 is an even number, and do you want to add 1 or take 1 away to get an odd number to facilitate votes? We decided not to suggest either way.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Zylstra.
What has led to your change of thinking of having the mayor be part of the council?
We didn't think very deeply about the mayor's involvement back then that I can recall. And nothing in my notes showed that we debated that question, whether the mayor should be a part of the council or not. If you look at the way the state runs, with the governor's not sitting in the legislature, nor is the president sitting in with Congress, it seems like there's models at work where the executive is more separate from the legislative body. That, combined with the fact it's just not working quite as well as we'd like to have seen it work, we thought, let's try to make a minor change.
Further questions? Seeing none, Mr. Kirby, I did have one question. Your red line changed to section 6.01 sub A inserting except when the city exercises its home rule powers under Article 9, Section 2 of the South Dakota Constitution. I'm just hoping you can explain the purpose of that insertion.
We used home rule powers to create this charter and this government, and we think the city has not fully utilized its home rule powers over the last 25 years. I think home rule is very powerful. A municipality can do a lot of things that are not necessarily in compliance with state law. They can write their own rules and regulations on things. So we wanted to make sure that if state law somehow prohibits ranked choice voting, which we think is an option that will be considered at some point in the future, that the city, we want to remind the city that it has the power under home rule, we think, in our opinion, to deviate from state election laws and write its own rules on how to run elections.
Further questions? All right, seeing none. Mr. Kirby, if you could wait one moment. I want to make sure that in working with the city attorney's office to get our list of formal recommendations updated with your proposals, that we've got everything clear here. So your first proposal is plurality voting for election of council members. And it's my understanding that is simply an amendment to Article 2, Section 2 of the Charter. Or do you see other portions of the Charter that would need to be amended to make that happen?
Which section did you refer to?
Article 2, Section 2.
Yes.
Okay. Next proposal would be remove mayor as member of city council, which would require amendments to Article 2, Section 11 and Article 2, Section 3, which would become Article 3, Section 5.
Yes.
Okay. Third, require a supermajority vote of the city council on bonding issues, which would require an amendment to Article 2, Section 11.
Yes.
Number 4 would be cleaning up the charter on the eligibility requirements for candidates, both for city council and the mayor, to take those out of Article 2, Section 2 of the charter, and also out of Article 3, Section 2 on the mayor, and moving it to a new section within Article 6 on city elections.
Yes.
And then I believe the final one would be the proposal you have that we just discussed on an amendment to Article 6, Section 1, related to exercise of home rule powers under the South Dakota Constitution.
Yes.
Okay, I appreciate it. Any other formal recommendations that you have that I haven't talked about so that we make sure our list is fully updated and accurate?
I think you've covered it.
Okay. Further questions? All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Kirby. Having concluded that item, we will move on to item E under new business, presentation by Councilor Janet Brecky on Article 2. It looks like she has also brought some assistance.
I do. Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Janet Brecky. I'm a current City Council member and a former City Attorney whose primary responsibility, along with the Council and Mayor, was to implement the Home Rule Charter form of government back in 1995. The purpose of my presentation today is to, number one, give you a heads up on 2 additional amendments that are probably going to be coming down that kind of tie into Joe and Dale's amendments, so I wanted to kind of give you a heads up on them. They will be coming with language, you know, like Joe has presented his, and so I'm just going to give you them in summary form now, but also to frame up the discussion, because I think those 2 amendments, along with what Joe and Dale are suggesting, work well together to tweak this charter, to get the government operating, I think, as it was envisioned by the original charter drafters. So again, my purpose today is to kind of help frame up the discussion and to kind of alert you what's coming down the pipe. The two things that are coming down, there's going to be an amendment, or I think there's going to be an amendment. I'm working with Tom Greco on it, to the city clerk provision. We're doing our research and our homework right now. It'll be a simple amendment that really shores up the city clerk's office as the official record-keeping entity in city government. There's an absence of language that was filled out in ordinance, but then the ordinance was repealed, and I think that I've got some concerns, again, which I'll share when we make the formal presentation, as to why we need that little island of independence as the official record keeper, and why that's important to our charter. And so that is one. That would be to section 208. And then in Article 5, financial procedures, at some point it'll either be during this cycle that the commission meets, or maybe in the next cycle, depending on efforts I'm conducting right now, working with my fellow council members and the mayor. But I think you're going to see something coming from me in the realm of strategic planning. And it will probably be in that section, in that article of the code, some requirement that lays out the directive that there be a strategic plan, probably before the budget, before the CIP. So, and it would be something that would be required for both, participation in a leadership position by the council, and then in a joint position, a joint effort with the mayor's office, that the two entities would work together to develop a strategic plan for the city. And again, that's something I'm working on, and I'm trying to decide whether it's best to try to flesh the thing out in ordinance and get something in place, and then follow up with an amendment to the charter that makes it permanent, so that it's always there, or whether it's best to get the charter amendment and then flesh it out in ordinance. But those are two things that I'm looking at. The reason I think that they go hand in glove, with the recommendations of Dale and Joe, is because just looking at where we are right now, what our current charter says, the actual operation of our city government is not currently operating the way that the language actually reads. So I'd start out with my first slide, which is the two slides, 201 and 301, which are the general powers and duties. The first one is the powers and duties of the council. And I've highlighted, I think, the critical language, while the entire section is short and sweet and to the point, but it's very strong, and you can see that the charter drafters conceived a strong council. All the powers of the city shall be vested in the city council. The council shall act as a part-time policy-making and legislative body, avoiding management and administrative issues. And then again, except as otherwise provided by law or charter, blah, blah, blah. But they were really envisioning a strong council in a leadership role, an independent kind of branch of government, working hand in glove, with the executive branch. And then going over to the next one, the executive branch. The executive and administrative power of the city shall be vested in a mayor. So, what do these two provisions mean together? What was contemplated and what's actually happening? Well, what policy setting is the city doing, and how is policy being set in the city? And so the next graphic that I put up there is, where is the city's strategic plan? Cities who engage in a strategic planning process are generally very prosperous. It demonstrates a functioning government. It demonstrates an ability for that government to lead and to vision and to work together. And so one of the first things that I did when I became city council member, I know that it was something that the council was struggling with from day one. They had the power, but they never evolved into the power in the fashion that the mayor's office did. They never evolved into their own. And I guess I've come to the conclusion over time that maybe happened for two reasons. One, again, some lack of structure in the charter. Again, nothing in the charter that says you shall do something together, you shall create this vision, you shall have a plan. And also just the way the turnover happens, and I guess the lack of just structure in ordinance, anything that really sets out those policy setting functions and how they should be engaged in them. So when knowing that background, and I know that there's been, some attempts over time and some attempts at goal setting, but there's never been anything, from a strong policy perspective, to my knowledge, that's come forth from the city council. And so I'm going to just show you where the city is at currently and what I was able to find, when I got here as a city council member. Currently, we have the Mayor's One program, and the mayor's told me, and I would agree, this is the first time anything like this has been done by the city of Sioux Falls. And, he's actually established a program with some goals, and primarily those are goals that are set by the individual departments. I've just shown you part of it, and I think you have it as part of your handouts. If not, just to glance through it. But they're department goals, all appropriate for what the mayor's role is, that executive administrative role, to actually set goals, for the city through his departments and engage his departments. And I was extremely complimentary and actually very excited that he did that, because I thought I view it as a really good beginning, to move in a sort of strategic planning kind of role, for our government. So I thought it was a really important first step. But, that alone, again, that's what the mayor's doing, for his team, for his staff, and of course, the spin-off of that is that's what is being done for the city. So what has the council done? Where does the council come into the planning or the visioning for the city? So I tried to look and say, okay, what, as I'm getting used to my new role as a city council member, where are our policy setting documents? Where are our meetings? When are we having policy setting meetings as a group? And actually, doing our visionary goal setting and stuff for the city. And I really could just find two things in terms of what the city council is currently doing now. And when I looked backwards, I really couldn't find much more by way of policy documents, by way of any kind of policy vision. And those two things are, one is there's a joint legislative resolution that the city of Sioux Falls works on with a myriad of other organizations. It's sort of a regional document where we try to give direction to the legislature about what would be helpful to counties, cities, municipalities. And that document is here on my next one. And I would say this about it, it's a short, sweet document to the point. However, there is no underlying document that's just for the city. This is the joint, there's no document where the city actually sets out its goals for the city of Sioux Falls and then extracts some of those and turns it into this joint regional effort. This is developed through a committee process, and it's reviewed each year, and it's just kind of random. That's not random, there's a very detailed process, but the only process that's in place is this regional process. So the next item that's up here is what I call a budgetary priorities document. And this was developed for the first time last year. And it was an attempt to get us started on that. Teresa Staley called the meetings. And as far as I know, it's the first time in a very long time that there was any effort given towards trying to set some goals and objectives in place before the budget process. And if you look at the items in it, you'll see it's extremely random. And again, I am not criticizing this. This is a good start too. This is a start to have those kinds of discussions that actually are policy discussions. And so I'm no criticism for it, but it took place in about two 2-hour meetings, and the council just brought their ideas, and you can see there's not a lot of methodology. It was pretty random. I would say this, again, in a compliment to the administration, that the first 3 goals up there, the first 4 actually, the administration took very seriously. And I think the council's seen a reaction to it. And you'll see, the list of items, again, it's just it was more like a green light thinking session, and then we, with a simple vote, we prioritized them. But I'd note you to look down to the third one from the bottom. And that was mine. There's only one vote, and that was for funding for long-range strategic planning. So at the moment, it's a tough sell. to get the council interested in engaging in such a process. But I think that changes that we're contemplating, that are being discussed, might be the kind of nudge that, moves the council forward to that kind of independence. So what I'm envisioning, and I guess why, I'm wanting to present and wanting to get involved in the process as well, is to offer my support for the revisions that Dale and Joe are recommending. I think they're spot on. Because if you look at, again, what's already in place, and that's why I started out with the two provisions, it clearly, and I should add the word executive here, it clearly is executive administrative operations is the mayor, and then policy and legislation is the council. That's clearly what the core document says. And in order for it to work effectively, it needs to have that balance, and there needs to be the council as an independent, respected party, operating independently and avoiding those management and administrative issues. And I think that was a key language in there, that they really want the council to stay out of that. But my observation has been that's mostly what we're doing, is we're getting focused on, and that's why we're getting focused on the administrative issues. We're into approving contracts. We're into the day-to-day operations with opinions and ideas and in handling individual problem solving and using legislation to problem solve as opposed to setting policy. And I think, that these things together, what I'm suggesting, the direction we go, and what Joe and Dale are suggesting, is the kind of things that would help us move that council into that policy setting role. And I've got these two examples. I want to send these around. I couldn't really make copies of them. Having shown you the two policy documents that I was able to find for the council, I now want to show you, the kind of policy setting document that I dream could be for the council. And this is a document, this is the National League of Cities. They've got 19,000 members, which represent 280 million constituent cities, in the country. But, what you see there is a document that has laid out, whoops, back up. I guess I don't have that one on there, yeah. What you see there is a document that has laid out goals, objectives, action plan, and then, eventually, you get into funding. And to me, wouldn't it be wonderful if you could go into the mayor's office or the council's office and a stack of something like that was sitting there and you had a clear direction. It's a 7-point plan, with clear identification of direction and what you're, what it is that the direction that you're moving the city forward. And again, I see what, it's not in conflict with what the mayor's done with the one program. It's just that the city council really needs to take a leadership role in this and dovetail, their piece into that, so that what I call all of those 8 election certificates are working in tandem together to create, kind of a master plan or a master move for the city. And if you don't have that, I would say you really don't have those balances, that balance of power that was originally intended by the charter. What you've got is the council kind of acting as the right hand of the mayor, as opposed to the council acting as this respected independent body, this working hand in glove with the mayor. So I would conclude as my vision, and what I've got up there is a paint by numbers picture. And I was trying to think of the best way that I could explain it in a meaningful way. And for me, it's, together, in a planning process with an independent body, if the council can evolve, if we can put things into place, just some small tweaks that will nudge them along and allow them to evolve into an independent, respected partner that it was intended to be, what you've got is the council and the mayor working together to create the paint by numbers picture with the numbers in there. And then, when you actually get to implementing it, together together that's where the colors come in, and the mayor paints it in the administrative side. And so it's two bodies working in tandem, And I think that's a good graphic to kind of demonstrate that vision. Together, they paint in the picture with the mayor doing the actual work. And so I would just conclude by saying that I think Joe and Dale's amendments provide that necessary independence. In the grand scheme of things, I think they're small changes, and they would provide the necessary independence for taking the mayor out of the council process, removing the tie-breaking vote, the supermajority. Those are all kinds of things that will kind of help the council evolve into that independence, and then get them working as a body, as a council body, making decisions as the council as a whole. And at this moment, I mean, we have very few meetings with the council as a body. We had 3 working sessions last year, and we're just not functioning as a body. We're all independently doing all these different independent things. So I think these changes will help, and I do also like the plurality voting issue. I think that will, with the RVC choice, I think that will also help resolve that issue, because it's been sort of one that the council's had struggling with, so I think they need some guidance from the Charter Revision Commission. So that's the end of my presentation. I thank you, and if you've got any questions, I would be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Brecky. Questions from the commission? Mr. Timian.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you. That was very well done.
Thank you.
Other questions? Ms. Brecky, I had a couple of them. So we received some materials this morning, this afternoon, right before the meeting, 2018 Municipal Form of Government Survey and Municipal Form of Government Trends and Structure, et cetera. Were these your materials?
Those were my materials. I'm glad you asked. Give you just a little footnote. I was just, again, trying to become current on what's happening now, what are the trends, and that was some very good updated language that kind of would, again, you can read it yourselves, but it basically kind of tells, I drew this from it. People are not actively throwing out one form of government for another form of government anymore. It seems to show that there's trends. If there are trends, there's trends for people to modify what they've got instead of just wholesale change of form of government. I know that there are people out here who are interested in doing that. John Cunningham's going to be speaking with you. He and I have spoke. I actually suggested that he come to this group and let that be known, because I've heard his voice and others that think like he does about it, and so I thought it would be valuable to you. And I know in his materials, he had referred to this information as well. But I thought that was helpful to know. And then I also noted in there that changes to strong mayor forms of government have often been a reduction in the mayor's powers or a change in the mayor's powers when that's happening. So I would just point out that's not unheard of, or it's not infrequently done that's taken a look at, and for those cities that have adopted that form of government.
And for the benefit of the public, we'll make sure that the minutes to the meeting contain copies of the additional materials that you submitted just before the meeting today, and then also during the meeting, the National League of Cities infrastructure materials. We'll make sure that those are part of the minutes. I did have a number of questions about your information on strategic planning. However,
I would add, there are copies out there for the public too.
Perfect, thank you. Let me just ask this up front. It's my understanding you are not making today specific formal recommendations for amendments to the charter. Is that correct? Okay. So I will reserve then my questions on the strategic planning information until such time as formal recommendation is made. But I certainly appreciate your time and discussion points. I think this is valuable for us to hear and to kind of know a little bit of background about how things work in the city government with the branches interacting. Any further questions for Ms. Brecky? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the final item under new business F, a presentation from John Cunningham on options to form of government. Welcome, Mr. Cunningham.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, thank you very much. I'm John Cunningham, and I've been invited to excuse me, to share some of my thoughts and experiences concerning the various forms of government. Concerning my bona fides, I have a master's in public administration from Harvard, the John F. Kennedy School, and I have worked as a staff to the city council in Omaha, a policy analyst under the strong mayor form of government that they have, and as a division chief in Prince William County, Virginia, under a county manager, county executive form of government, which would be analogous to city manager. And as a result, I have some education experiences that might be useful to you. There are two general categories of city government, strong mayor and weak mayor, and many forms of each. The strong mayor form is generally characterized by the mayor being the elected city manager, and he may also preside over the city council. This form is very popular with small cities where the mayor and the council get together and decide what to do when the mayor goes off and does it. It's in the other form, the mayor is elected city manager but does not participate in council meetings, and that's the form that, for example, Omaha has. The weak mayor form is characterized by professional management, where the mayor usually presides over the city council but has no administrative duties. He serves as a ceremonial head, and the mayor and the council then hire professional management of the city and exercise legislative oversight, ensuring that the manager follows all laws, rules, and regulations, both operational and financial. This is the most common form of government in medium and large cities and is based on the highly successful corporate model, where the shareholders, in this case the citizens, elect a policy-making body, the board of directors for a company or the city council for the city, who then employ a professional chief executive in the case of a corporation, or a city manager in the case of a city. Currently, the city has the strongest of the strong mayor forms, where the mayor presides over both the administration and the council. If the mayor has a majority, or even half of the council behind him or her, the mayor can completely dictate both the policies and the administration of the city. And I think the comments by Mr. Kirby pointed out that this hasn't always been a great system. A lot of things are happening through a 5-4 vote, including the aborted hotel issue downtown. But that decision itself isn't just the problem. During that discussion, I'm going to bring this issue up later. During that discussion, the council asked for some information about the investors, and the information is not granted. And so the issue of information I'll bring up later. As I understand it, the one proposal being considered, I think Mr. Kirby pointed out, is to remove the mayor from the council, leaving the council at 8 members, and I'll call that option 1. And another option I'll present is professional management, the second option. Under option 1, the mayor would need 5 votes rather than 4 in order to advance his or her agenda. This is the major, and I see it, the only advantage of this proposal over the existing system. It does not solve any of the problems for 2 reasons. The mayor will still likely acquire 5 votes rather than just 4, and that is not as difficult as it seems. If a mayor is ambitious, clever, and strong, which are common traits in a mayor, the mayor is likely to gain a majority of the councilors on his team, the majority being 5, in any event. For example, because the mayor has the full power of the city administration behind him in order to do this, he can, if I were and I'm going to pick on Councilor Starr for a moment.
Mr. Chair?
Okay.
Apologize for the interruption. It appears that we are currently in a tornado warning.
Oh.
So we may want to adjourn the meeting at this time and invite you back to our next meeting of the commission. I'll defer to the city staff. Okay.
Priority number 1, so.
Okay. All right. Please continue, Mr. Cunningham. Pardon the interruption.
Okay. Back to this. it would not be as difficult as it sounds for the mayor to get 5 votes on his team. With the entire power of the city administration behind him, I could go to a council member's district who is not on my team, find a person who would be a loyal supporter, and by promising that I would support this person in acquiring a storm drainage, a new park, or whatever things that they want in that district, if you will elect my supporter, by using the whole power of the city administration, the mayor is likely to still get the majority of votes and create his own team. So it's not all that difficult. And having the power of the city administration behind him or her makes the mayor extremely strong. The problem with a strong mayor is that the mayor is strong. Power flows from the mayor to the council by the mayor's ability to influence elections, grant or not grant favors to councilors or for services, or through downright intimidation. And the problem with misinformation or lack of information to the council is still not addressed. I've mentioned that earlier. I'm going to give a real-world example that I was involved in. In Omaha, I was a staff policy analyst, and we had a strong mayor separate from the council. Mayor Boyle sent a contract to the council changing the health insurance administrator for the city. We self-insured, but hired a company, in that case Blue Cross, to process the claims. And this contract changed that from Blue Cross to the local company called Midwest Benefits. I was the finance department analyst and checked with the finance director and asked, Bill, what can you tell me about this? He said, well, the number shows that the cost for Blue Cross is $3 million and Midwest Benefits 2.5, and so I sent it forward. Well, I looked at the bid sheets and noticed that in almost all the costs, Midwest Benefits was higher than Blue Cross, and including one big negative number, where Blue Cross had a -$1 million and Midwest Benefits $2 million for the coordination of benefits system, where they recover from third-party primary insurers. And so I said, why is this number bigger? And Bill said, it's not my job to question the numbers, but it is his question. The mayor simply told him, this is my speculation, simply told him it wasn't his job. And as a result, when I presented this to the council, they changed the numbers and awarded it to Blue Cross. But the point is that the mayor can, and very likely does, that's my speculation, control and manage the information that goes to the council in such a way that he can steer contracts and services in a way that furthers his further political ambitions, and to people or companies that can assist his future political needs. With a city manager, neither of these problems exists. A city manager's only agenda is to make the city successful for his or her resume if a bigger offer becomes available. If Omaha had a city manager doing this, it would clearly have recommended Blue Cross to begin with. The spurious number would have shown right up. But if the manager is not elected, so has no political agenda except that of the city council who appoints him, and that agenda is established through the ordinances, resolutions, policies, and procedures and priorities that the council adopts, and that's done in open meeting and is very transparent. With a city manager, this operation of the city is almost always transparent, and not so with a strong mayor. With the city manager, the power flows to the executive, the manager, from the council, rather than from the mayor to the city council. I worked for 14 years in Prince William County, Virginia, with a county executive who corresponds to a city manager. The county received nearly 24 awards for being one of the best managed counties in the nation from the National Association of Counties. That's why I'm such a supporter, and it's the most common, most popular form for cities of our size. It's the most successful corporate model, and Sioux Falls is a municipal corporation. And again, the problem with the strong mayor is that the mayor is strong. In summary, there are important differences between separating a separate strong mayor proposal and a city manager proposal. In all forms, the executive needs a majority on the council. The strong mayor form does not prevent a strong, aggressive mayor from getting a majority on the council by using the full power of city government to influence the council through influencing elections, granting or not granting requests for services, and possibly even intimidation. A city manager can only obtain and maintain a majority on the city council through professional conduct and successful management of the city and adherence to the policies, procedures, and priorities of the city council. The strong mayor form does not provide transparency. The mayor's agenda is his or her political future and can control the flow of information to the council and hide political considerations. A city manager has no political considerations and no motivation for lack of transparency, which can cause him or her the job if discovered. For these reasons, I suggest you consider the highly successful corporate model, which has an elected policy body hiring a professional manager to implement its policies, and which model is the most common among cities our size and larger because of its success. Now, your comment earlier, Commissioner Zylstra, says how big a revision is too big a revision, and that's so maybe I'm proposing something that's too big a revision, but my experience in both of those has led me to believe that the city manager is leaves all of the politics in the council, and the administration is not then subject to this administration and manipulation. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham. Just at the outset, before we get to questions from the commission, I want to clarify, are you making a formal recommendation to the Charter Revision Commission that we propose an amendment to institute a weak mayor or city manager form of government?
That would be my recommendation, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the commission? All right, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Cunningham, for your time and presentation. We appreciate the information you've passed along. That concludes new business according to the agenda, and we move now to public input. I would start public input by commenting. Mr. Kirby's presentation today involves multiple formal recommendations that overlap with recommendations we received at our last meeting from Mr. Mathias. So I don't see Mr. Mathias here today, but I would extend to Mr. Mathias an invitation to return to our next commission meeting and to offer comments on whether or not he feels that Mr. Kirby's presentations would satisfy at least 3 of his recommendations. The 4th one from Mr. Mathias was that the city attorney be an elected position and that we make that amendment to the city charter. Mr. Kirby has not made that recommendation today, so that one will definitely stand. But we would, and I certainly extend an invitation to Mr. Mathias to return and offer comment on those overlaps. Other public input. Welcome back, Mr. Cunningham.
Again, I'm John Cunningham. An observation came to me during Councilor Breckia's presentation. There's a comment in there that the council should not involve itself in administrative or management issues, and that's partially true, but ignores the fact that the legislative body has a responsibility called legislative oversight. Now, the Charter Commission, the existing commission, can't trust old people. The current charter does provide legislative oversight for financial matters and provides an audit of financial matters only. That is not the only legislative oversight responsibility. The council may adopt ordinances and policies and resolutions governing, for example, purchasing and personnel. But it's also their responsibility to make sure that those are followed, not just make the laws and say the mayor can follow them if he wants to. It's a legislative responsibility to ensure, to oversight, not to administer the city, but so it's only, what I'm saying is that statement is partially true. They shouldn't do administration or management of the city, but they should do oversight to ensure that management is consistent with state and federal laws and local ordinances. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Cunningham on that? All right. Thank you, Mr. Cunningham. Before we move on to further public input, I would note, following up on Mr. Zylstra's comments from much earlier in the meeting, I would say that, based on my review of the charter and Mr. Cunningham's proposal as formal recommendation, that moving to a weak mayor, city manager form of government would require substantial rewrite to the existing charter. I could be wrong on that, but I would ask the city attorney's office if you could provide us at the next meeting some type of, I don't know if we want to necessarily call it an opinion, but an analysis of how substantial a rewrite it would require to the charter to move to a weak mayor, city manager form of government, and whether or not that substantial an amendment is within the authority of this commission as established by ordinance that we talked about last meeting, the ordinances from the city council. Mr. Timian.
I guess I would think that before we ask the city staff to take on that work, that we would look at that and say, do we see pursuing an issue of changing the form of government to weak mayor, city manager? On that, I think we could have that discussion prior.
Ms. Hayek.
I think it's going back to Mr. Zeistro's comments before. As I read our duty and our role as a charter revision commission, we do not have the authority to change the form of government. Only the electors, the voters of the citizens have, I believe, that authority. Now, possibly we could put it on the ballot, but I'm thinking that I guess I would like our city attorney to really, whether we can even go that far. I think Mr. Kirby's suggestions are certainly within line with some of the stuff we can do, and Ms. Brecky's, but I don't know that a total form of government is, I think we might be overstepping our bounds. It's my thoughts.
I would just offer the comment that, if I remember correctly, our decision at the first meeting last month was we would accept from the public, within our charge from the city council, any formal recommendations offered by a member of the public for an amendment to the charter, and put them on our list, and then we would take formal action as a commission on those items. So I certainly am not proposing, or excuse me, I'm not necessarily in favor of moving to that form of government, but I think from a procedural standpoint, the decision of this commission was that we would act on every formal recommendation from the public on amendments to the charter. Certainly, I think if the city attorney's office offers an opinion or guidance that that substantial an amendment would be outside our authority, that would certainly be a reason why I think we could take the action to take no action or to reject that proposed amendment. But I think for the time being, I would recommend that this commission put that on our list and then take action at a future meeting. Further discussion? All right. Further public input, in particular on Articles 7, 8, and 9 of the Charter. Proposed amendments to those articles. All right, seeing none. Open discussion from the commission on any items we've already talked about today or any other items regarding the charter, future meetings, movie reviews. All right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
Moved by Mr. Timian, seconded by Ms. Belides that we adjourn this meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.